So, as you heard, a core element of my findings relates to communication. So perhaps that's not surprising because that has always been of primary interest to me, and that's where I want to begin tonight. The idea of helping boys to become better social communicators, which is not about becoming more popular or becoming a better student or positioning yourself to get into the finest universities. In fact, it is about being able to connect with a world larger than yourself. Empathy is the tenuous string that joins boys to a life of conscience, leadership, and community. That's why social communication is important. Boys are very good at what we call instrumental communication. Pass the milk. Can I have $5? You're going to eat all them fries? They get how to do that part, right? But explaining what makes someone a good friend. Why do you like that teacher better than another teacher? What is it that you really want to do with your life? Those kinds of complex questions require social communication skills that are a great challenge for a great many boys. They don't get much practice at that. In part, this is based on what we call something that's called theory of mind, the capacity to understand that other people have different perceptions and thoughts than you're having. There's a famous experiment in psychology that we do with 3-year-old children. We show a 3-year-old child a box that's covered with colorful pictures of candy. And we say to the child, "What's inside the box?" And the child says, "Candy." And we open the box, and all that's inside are yellow pencils. Quickly close the box and say, "What will your brother think is inside the box?" And the child says, "Pencils." Because at age 3, you believe what you have learned is now part of the collective knowledge base of humanity. Now that I know pencils and they're in that box, we all know that. Because you have not yet learned to differentiate between your subjective reality and that of others. You haven't even learned that you are different from other people in that way. Most 4-year-olds do not fall for the deception. By age 4, we get that trick and we understand that our 4-year-old brother will think that candy's inside the box also. And that's just the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, of an entire lifetime of developing this kind of social perceptual awareness that what you're thinking is not necessarily what another person is thinking. It is the essence of what we call emotional intelligence. And to the extent that it is nurtured early in boys' lives, they become really good at this kind of communication and social perceptual kind of skill, and they become more and more effective at relating to other people. And if we really take the time to work on these tasks when they are still young, we see kids and adolescents who can do remarkable things, but if we wait till adolescence, we spend unfortunately many years trying to accommodate the problem rather than actually making any headway in improving it. We all know about the effects of electronica, the limited attention that it leads to, the irritability, social withdrawal, but there is a more important consequence at stake that we should really be aware of. And that is that it represents the extinction of boredom and the demise of civility. Boredom is really important. It is not cool or fun to be bored, but the capacity for boredom is essential. Without boredom, it is impossible to have a civil society. To be civil, you have to be able to slow down your mind long enough to reflect on what you want to say and how you want to react in a particular situation. And we have an entire generation of kids whose brains have been trained to move from all peaks and no valleys, right? They move from one moment of stimulation to the next, always avoiding a valley. When most contemporary school children say, "I'm bored," or if they get bored, they also say, "I don't feel so good." Because they actually internalize boredom as a kind of sickness. I feel queasy, I don't feel good if I get too bored. They are so unaccustomed to tolerating this experience of boredom. And so manners are a matter of habit. Lots of people can learn to say please and thank you. They can learn to hold the door open for others. But to be truly civil means you have to have the capacity for empathy. That is a much more complex task, and it requires that capacity to slow down your mind long enough to be reflective, to be thoughtful, to be able to kind of understand or consider for a moment what someone else might be thinking or feeling. Brain research reveals the hows and whys of social communication. The first thing that we should know about boys is that they don't hear nearly as well as girls. If you are female right now, you feel as though I am shouting. If you are male, you can barely hear me. That's just how it is. There is a huge difference. If you are male, you don't hear as well. You hear less of the volume of what is being said. You miss a lot of stuff. And I'm going to come back to the consequences of that because they are great. You miss much of what's being said in the world. Secondly, we have a lot of left hemisphere thinkers in a right hemisphere world. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Somebody says to you, "My dog died last week." And if you are a male left hemisphere thinker, you just heard, "You had a dog. It died. It happened last week. Just the facts, ma'am." But if you are a right hemisphere thinker, then your right hemisphere noticed the eyes of the person that just said that. Your right hemisphere pays attention to the prosody of the person's speech, the rate, the rhythm, the tone of their speech, pays attention to their body language, and so you get the comprehensive whole idea of what was just said to you, why it's important, what this person is feeling that just said this to you. But we have a whole generation of kids who are processing almost exclusively over there on the left hemisphere. They're processing in that kind of monotone way where emotion never kind of gets in there. This is a kind of voice that I use when I'm trying to connect with those types of boys. I take it out. It sounds easy, right? It's like golf. Try it sometime. You know, it's hard. It's taken me 20 years to learn how to talk like this. But it's highly effective in relating to a lot of the boys that I work with. The genders are much more alike than they are different, but small differences can have a big impact. I don't know how to quantify how alike or different genders are. I don't think anybody has done that. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that the genders are 90 or 95% alike, that there's only a 5% difference. I got news for you. That's the 5% we pay attention to. That's the 5% that gets all of our attention, all of our reflection, all of our thinking, our analysis, our worry, our concern. That's what we pay attention to. Even among boys, those that kind of lag behind, that don't know how to kind of communicate ideas, thoughts, and feelings, are the ones that we pay attention to in classrooms, are the ones that get noticed by various peers, and so forth. I found in writing my first book, and looking at research done with kindergarten and first grade teachers around the world, that those boys who learn how to read earlier are the very same boys who have better social skills during those early years of their schooling. That it makes an enormous difference. And I began to be very curious about this, and the reason for it is that you learn to read by being able to decode the 52 phonemes that make up all the words in the English language. The English language is comprised of 52 word sounds. Cat is made up of 3 phonemes, ka, at. You have to hear all 52, and in your mind you have to see what they look like when they're written out to be able to read. And kids with that sort of phonological awareness, who have hearing at that level, they also learn how to socialize better because they pick up so much more auditory information as they're interacting with other kids. So it's a real blessing to have those great auditory processing skills. We have idealizations about who boys are and who we want them to be that isn't always a good fit for who they actually are and how they like to express themselves. And there is a disconnect there. And we should not worry about boys who are inordinately angry at a young age. It's better to have a 7-year-old who gets angry than one who says nothing. Anger is at least a sign of a person in there that wants to be heard, that wants to be known, that wants to be recognized by other people. Clearly there are inappropriate ways of expressing your anger in the world that will set you back. And so we have to make that distinction for kids about appropriate and inappropriate, but it is overall better to have someone who is demonstrative at an early age than someone who basically is very reserved and feels always hesitant to make themselves known. Can he say what he means? Does he know what he feels? This word, dyslexithymia, you probably never heard because I made it up. And it comes right from Greek roots, meaning, insufficient words for emotion. The thing to know about boys is that they have as much emotional complexity as do girls. There is as much going on there, but the conduit through which those emotions would be known to others is obstructed. So they're not naming what it is that they feel, and as a consequence, not able to share themselves with other people. This is, in large part, the good work of the Children's Art Guild, is to use art making as a kind of process in which children might become more kind of connected with a language for discussing themselves. Not only would they develop the verbal skills and the process of these kinds of facilitated groups, but for some kids, the art making itself becomes that first step, at least visually, of making yourself known, what's going on for yourself emotionally. When we're building a social vocabulary, the depth is more important than the breadth. I've been at this a long time now and have traveled pretty far and wide, and so people now come from all over the United States to visit me in Rhode Island at my office. They come from other countries sometime, especially in the summer. And often I am visited by families with brilliant children, kids who are much smarter than me, kids who have IQs that are much higher than mine. Have you ever had the burden of interacting with a child who's smarter than you? Yes. That's tough, right? That's not always the most pleasant thing. I don't always enjoy that because I sometimes get kids, I think, oh boy, this kid is like way smarter than me. What am I going to say here? Of course, I don't say that out loud, but I'm thinking it and I'm sweating. You know, what am I going to say here? But I notice that sometimes these brilliant kids with a 400-page novel in tote are sitting with their legs crossed, quietly listening as their mom or dad says, you know, he's doing great in school, but he just doesn't have any friends. I wonder why. He never puts the book down. So he has an immense vocabulary, but knows relatively little about how to use that vocabulary in a way that will really connect him with other people. So we have kids that are good auditory, visual, or kinesthetic processors. And if your child is a good auditory learner, then in all probability they do well in school and they enjoy school, because school is all about auditory processing. You primarily learn by listening. And if your child is a visual processor, then he or she probably also does well in school, because there's enough of school that is visual that you can make sense out of what you're being taught and feel as though you have a place there. But what about kids who are kinesthetic processors? So many boys that learn by touching, by doing, by moving, by mapping space in 3 dimensions in their mind. They are often like a fish out of water in school. School is not a very welcoming place for kids that process in that way. This is the disenfranchisement and the alienation that so many kids feel when we say we have a problem with boys not going on to higher education in the United States. That's really the reason. Not that we have kids that can't do math or don't have the intelligence to do it, but who process and make sense of the world in such a way that often in school they don't feel as though they belong. There is a real disconnect there. In the early days of my clinical work, I was sent kids like this from the schools near my office. And I would meet with these boys, and I would think to myself, gosh, this doesn't seem like a bad kid. This seems like a pretty good kid to me. I wonder why he's having such a problem in school. I have this note from a principal, from the head of a school, from a teacher. And I began to test my hypothesis about listening by asking questions like this. I would ask 10-year-old Dylan this question. Dylan, what does this sentence mean? She cried and cried at her son's wedding. Why does someone cry at a wedding, Dylan? No emotion. Or I'd say something like this. Richard, what's this sentence mean? After he spelled the word wrong for the 3rd time, he practically fell down laughing. Why is that silly? And I would just keep probing and ask these questions, and I discovered that kids were not understanding the layers of emotional information in those kinds of statements. And so when they got pushed at school, or when someone said something to them that they perceived as being overly harsh or critical, they totally misinterpreted the situation because they weren't able to process the layers of meaning in those kinds of sentences, that there was a lot of emotional information that was not being processed by a great number of school-age boys. I hesitate to say a majority of school-age boys, but it seemed to me that it was almost half were having real difficulties with that kind of processing. Now, in addition to questions like that, there's another very effective way at making sense of what kind of processor a person is. So, will you help me for just a second? Sure. You sit right where you are. Your first name is?
Robin.
Robin. I'm just going to ask Robin a very quick question. Robin, tell me something very, very important that happened to you when you were 5 or 6. Stop. Okay. Robin tells me everything I need to know about what kind of a learner she is in just a few seconds. First, she does the most likely thing, which is that when I ask that question, she looks very hard to the right. And that's what we do when we have to construct a memory from the pastiche of images that are floating through our consciousness. If we have eidetic memory, photographic memory, or if we are so plagued by anxiety about being exactly right, we look to our left. But 90% of us would look to our right. That's what Robin did. But the big tell that Robin gives me is she kept her eyes level and right on plane. She looked just directly to her right, which tells me that Robin processes as an auditory learner. Her primary pathway is by listening. Now, I might have guessed that Robin was a visual processor if she had done this. Looked up, because for visual people, all of life's answers are up there. Let me see, I don't know. Do I want the fish or the lobster? They both sound good. All the answers are up here. They're all up there, right? That's it. That's where visual processors look. But where do kinesthetic processors, like the boys that I'm talking about, look when they're asked questions? Where do these guys look? They look down here. Feet on ground, zone of safety, me feel safe. How was school today? Are you making any new friends? Always down here. They sit like athletes. You ever watch athletes on ESPN when they're interviewed? This is how they sit. Knees apart, squared off, shoulders back, receptors on your back, leaning deep into the chair, sinking way in. Me feel confident, me good, ready. Go ahead, ask question. Just like that. Always in that way. That's how they sit. That's how they greet the world. And so when I also watch boys who kind of use their body in that way and always are looking down, I realize, okay, that's a kinesthetic processor. And if I want to relate to a person like that, an adolescent, a pre-adolescent, I better not say what I would say to Robin, because to Robin I would say, Robin, do you hear what I'm getting at here? Or to a visual person I might say, do you see what I'm saying? But what do I do with a kinesthetic boy like that? I punch him in the arm and say, yeah, you get the feel of this? I right away try to make contact. It's generally not acceptable to punch kids in school. And that's unfortunate. That's truly unfortunate, because most would be happier if they were being punched. Almost all the time. Because every time we make the physical contact, we wake up their entire mind-body system. This is, again, one of the reasons that art making is so effective, because it's kinesthetic. It involves motor skills, it involves touching materials, it involves making contact with the world beyond yourself. And you feel more animated and awake and alive, and that's just the way it works. There have been numerous studies using functional MRIs to look at what happens in kids' brains as they're kind of learning in a classroom, and to look at differences between males and females. And we consistently see that when you move off an interaction with a female student of a classroom, her auditory cortex stays active and she continues to be tuned in to the ambient information of the class. She's paying attention to what a classmate is saying and what her teacher's saying. And for so many boys, it's like, hey, wake me up when it's my turn to talk again. They are going to sleep and checking out. So some way of keeping that mind-body system awake, very important. These are some of the things that you learn in a social skills group, like the distance you stand to someone, how to take turns, how to make enough eye contact to let someone know you're listening, but not so much that you scare the other person, right? Using greetings and modulating your voice, and one of the great challenges of all time, the giving of a compliment. In some of my social skills groups with kids, sitting around with 7 or 8 kids, I have said to them, guys, let's begin today by each guy in the group giving a compliment to every other guy in the group. 10 minutes of silence passes. No one can think of one. And I'll have to start it by saying, okay, I'll get it started. Dylan, that's a nice shirt you've got on today. Give a compliment to Aaron. I like those pants, Aaron. Those are really nice shoes, Richard. I love your belt, Brian. You know, and so on it goes till all 7 articles of clothing are exhausted. And that's it. And I simply tried to correct that by typing up a list. I typed up a list of 100 compliments and passed it out and said, read something from the list. We'll fake it till we make it. Read something from the list. At least get the idea of what it sounds like to give someone a compliment. Here's 100 things you could say. 100. Just pick one. Sometimes we have to practice that way until we really connect. Goal-directed transitions are knowing how to switch from one topic to another in a conversation without coming across as abrupt or awkward. And code switching means that you know how to move between the colloquial code we use with our peers and the more formal code we use with an adult, with a teacher, with a school principal, etc. The worst day in a child's life is the day he comes bounding home from school, full of enthusiasm and joy. His parents sit him down at the dreaded kitchen table. This is the site of all traumas in families, the kitchen table. I would say throw out your kitchen table immediately. It's where we have all the difficult conversations with kids, trying to make too much eye contact, trying to get them to bare their souls to us. Have a seat at the kitchen table. Yeah, sure, I know what's coming now. Sure I will, I prefer to stand. Sit him at the kitchen table and we say, we've signed you up for a social skills group. No, please, no. Don't make me go, I can change. This time I mean it, I can change. You'll see, I'll really do it. No, you're going to a summer social skills group. It's horrible. And when kids first came to my social skills groups, that's how they felt. Arms crossed, long, dejected faces, looking at the ground, shuffling back to my office without enthusiasm. And I was miserable, completely miserable. And I began to feel as though I was a failure at this work. I began to get angry at kids for making me feel like a failure at this work. I began praying for the day when the cycle of social skills meetings would end and I could move back to doing things that made me feel good about my work. And yet it was a gnawing kind of, annoyance. I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and I kept thinking I must be doing something wrong. And this was back in the days when the movie Gladiator first came out. And when TNT showed movies Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I watched Gladiator Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And there, in the opening scene of the film, is the character of Maximus, played by Russell Crowe. And at a moment when he needs to galvanize the enthusiasm and the focus and the energy of his troops, he uses a code. And as soon as I heard it, I knew that's what was missing. I had found the answer I was looking for, and he says simply this: strength and honor. Strength and honor. As soon as I heard it, I thought, that's it. That's it. I later learned that Russell Crowe made that up on the set the day that Ridley Scott was orchestrating that big battle scene that starts the film. And that he thought of it because in the boys' school he had attended in Sydney, Australia, that was the motto that the head of the school used at various school assemblies. Strength and honor, gentlemen. Brilliant. Brilliant. And right away, the next week I go out into the waiting room and greet the kids in a new way. I extend a fist like this and say, "Strength and honor, Dylan. Strength and honor, Richard. Strength and honor, Aaron." And I taught them to greet me back the same way. "Strength and honor, Dr. Cox. Strength and honor, Dr. Cox. Strength and honor." And then we marched back to learn how to give compliments. That sort of enthusiasm, the same thing. We're just going to go give compliments, but now we're a band of brothers giving compliments. We are warriors that are going to give compliments. And it made all the difference. You could just feel it. And I noticed the kids were loving this. So I started, interlocking arms and singing chants together. I passed out a shark's tooth amulet to signify social courage. I was close to passing out weapons. It was like this was a group. They were a troop. They were ready to fight. They were ready to do something of consequence. And the key here is the great truth that if we want kids to follow us, if we want them to be motivated and to be happy, we have to understand the psychology of their kind of ideal. We have to understand who they idealize themselves to be, who they imagine and want themselves to be, and when we tap into that, they are ready to go with us anywhere and do anything and work as hard as we want them to work. But if we try to short circuit that, if we try to skip that step of paying attention to what's important to them, of paying attention to what their ideal of themselves is, we're lost. We are not leaders in their eyes. We don't get them. We are lost, and we really are not in a position to motivate or to encourage or to draw kids forward. That's what it really means to be in a child-centered society. It means paying attention and tuning in to those important cues. You have to kind of test that and understand it.